Hey there, we're going to be reading from Chosen Children 2021, Children as Commodities in America's Failed Foster Care and Adoption Industries by Lori Carangelo, the same book that you see above. And we're going to talk about the foster care in this book. So I'll be reading and I'll be giving what I know. She quotes, "There are three kinds of lies: damned lies, and statistics." Benjamin Disraeli, who was the British Prime Minister from 1874 to 1880. So this chapter is called How Many and Who's Counting? Historically, quote-unquote, true orphans were infants and children whose parents had died and there was no one to care for them. But today, few children placed in foster care are not actually quote-unquote true orphans. Half orphans, again that's in quotes, have one living parent, while quote-unquote economic orphans have one or two living parents who are unable to afford to care for them. Foster care includes emergency, temporary, or permanent placements of children in either public institutions or licensed residential group homes. And as of 2021, there are 424,000 kids in foster care nationwide, who range, and the median range is 6.5 years old. There are 20,000 kids aged out of the system between the ages of 18 and 21. And this is from foster.org, as well as the government's adoption and foster care analysis reporting system. 60,000 foster kids went missing, and this is according to the Other Missing Children Scandal, which was an article written by Renee Dennefield for the Washington Post, June of 2018. They also quote, "There are 1,200 teens disappear from foster care each year, specifically in LA. 50% of homeless youth on the street were runaways from foster care." And that is according to the LA Times, using the U.S. government national study. 65% of kids who age out of foster care have no place to go. 50% of the homeless youth on the street are runaways from foster care. Again, which I just quoted above. But the California Pacific Medical Center and Family Law Quarterly is the source on that one. 4 out of 5 children in orphanages worldwide have family, but poverty stands in the way of these families staying together, and that is according to the United Nations Rights of the Child Project. More than 20% of the nearly 6,300 foster children it has served came from quote-unquote failed adoptions. And this is according to multiple sources, but specifically in the Adoption and Donor Conception Facebook group. So I want to take a minute for the failed adoptions before we move on, because this chapter is not that long, and I'm going to do it in 2 parts. But the failed adoptions can either mean that the child is reunified or doesn't end up being adopted. That's usually privatized. But with foster care, it could mean that they're adopted and then working on being rehomed. There are literally Facebook groups for rehoming children, and there is no regulation behind it. It is quite disgusting. Okay, so the next part that they go into is following the dollars. And the quote that they start with for this chapter is, quote, "A billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon it adds up to real money." That is by Senator Everett McKinley Dickerson from 1896 to 1969. That's when they were alive. Alright, so the 2020 spending deal included 39% bump to the community-based child abuse prevention grants funded under CAPTA, C-A-P-T-A, up to $55.6 million from the $40 million last year. So that was $40 million was 2019. The state CAPTA grants got a big hike also in 2018, where from the fiscal year of 2018 to 2019, the U.S. spent $354 billion for child welfare programs, including Medicaid. The average foster care maintenance cost per child per year was $19,107. For those children receiving payments under Social Security Title 4-E, state and federal expenditures for foster care administration costs, placing them and monitoring children in foster care administration totaled about $4.3 billion for a total of 679,191 children, aka it costs about $6,675 per child. And that is according to the Congressional Research Service of the years 2019 and 2020. Because intact families are the foundation of any society, particularly disturbing is the fact that the kinship model with quote-unquote true parents is being replaced by the quote-unquote adoption model with the quote-unquote psychological parents at a much higher cost and failure rate than previously successful with the quote-unquote family preservation programs. The Adoption and Safe Families Act, so ASFA, endorsed adoption as the primary solution for the backlog of children in foster care who could not return home. But the act authorized payments of quote-unquote adoption bonuses to states that increase adoptions over an established baseline to cure state deficits. Where are the children coming from? Simply put, all of America's children now have a price on their heads, which, by the way, is illegal. Okay, I'm just letting you guys know that. Anywho, 68% of all Child Protective Services cases do not involve child maltreatment, but are quote-unquote deprivation of necessities due to poverty, and that is according to a Cornell University research. That is not to say that we should ignore the other 32% that may be actual abuse and neglect cases, which have increased at an alarming rate. It is saying that, quote-unquote, economically disadvantaged should not be in the same category as, quote-unquote, abused and neglected children, nor as a criteria for separating children from their families. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second. This is what adoptees are saying. Taking a child out of a home or giving them up for adoption because of poverty is not neglect, right? And we're all about, there's certain groups of people that are like, keep the baby, blah, 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 but then, they don't help. They're the same people that say, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But we're literally going through economic crisis right now, especially with the pandemic. Why can't we help families out of poverty? Not only will that lower the foster care rate, it'll lower the adoption rate, and it'll lower abortion rate. It'll hit all three. This is ridiculous. Anywho, sorry, I'm ranting. All right. On one hand, there have been severe underreporting of quote-unquote true child abuse, while on the other hand, the Department of Health and Human Services, DHS, justified funding by building a bureaucratic quote-unquote child abuse database, and many parents have lost children to the foster care system as a result for false claims of child abuse, particularly during divorce custody battles, backed by CPS. A parent claiming child abuse in expectation of winning custody instead of unexpectedly as their children wounded up and herded into foster care. The more taken into foster care, more could then be quote-unquote rescued via adoption, and even more federal funds are funneled to the states, family courts, evaluators, and facilitators, a process dubbed Cash for Kids. Founded in 1987, the National Association of State Vocal Organizations, so that's under NASVO, just in case you want to look it up, as an umbrella organization for victims of child abuse laws, so that's what VOCAL stands for, groups nationwide, was one of the major movers in bringing quote-unquote false abuse claims to the national attention, helping those falsely accused and exposing corruption with CPS. As with social stigma of quote-unquote unwed motherhood dwindled, so the main source of adoptable newborns to mothers who used to be hidden away at maternity homes. By the way, that still happens. So there evolved a mistake belief that taxpayer dollars are being quote-unquote saved by depriving unemployed or low-income parents of their children and depriving children of their biological families who are not declared unfit by court. CPS treats poverty as quote-unquote intentional and neglectful, quote, even though according to the last 2010 census, 43.6 million Americans were living below the poverty line, which was set at $22,350 annual income. Sociologists and government officials argue that poverty is still understated. Several businesses, including the private corrections industry firm GEO Group, are currently involved with a new lecture source of quote-unquote cash for kids. GEO Group gave Donald Trump, lovely, a $250,000 donation, and they spent $1.7 million lobbying the government in 2017, more than any other private contractor, and gave a pro-Trump super PAC $225,000 during the election. Subsequently, Trump rewarded GEO Group with over $1.3 billion in contracts with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, aka ICE, the entity that detains and traffics children who enter the United States unaccompanied or separated from their parents who were detained, many deported without their children. In June 2018, under Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy, ICE held 11,786 migrant children in detention in cages. Americans reacted en masse to protest the first 1,500 forcible separations of children from their families, protesting the sending of those children to undisclosed locations in at least 16 states. The current estimate as to the number of migrant children detained from 100 to 240 days is at 15,000. ICE plans to transport 225,000 children over the next 5 years. In 6 months from late December 2018 to May 22nd, 2019, there have been 6 deaths of migrant children while in U.S. custody. CNN wonders how many more deaths went unreported. And what about the deaths, disappearance, and incarceration of American kids out of the foster care? So it's true. I also want to note that I forgot what year, but the ICE lost thousands of kids and still have yet to find them, and they didn't even go looking. So, and that was ICE. That was the migrant kids. That's not even including the foster kids. This happens, like I said, all the time with foster kids, and it's really, really gross. Anyway, I'm going to end this video here. There will be a part 2 and a part 3 to the foster care. And the next part will be foster kids outcomes. Thank you all for listening.